So feminism requires men in power.
Feminism requires men to support feminist goals.
In power. It's an allowance system.
Everything is an allowance system. Like we're bargaining with people who are stronger and have more power than we do in order to get what we want.
So that means feminism, the way you're describing it, relies wholly, every aspect that, any kind of cherries you want to put on top, like any amenities, extra whipped cream on the feminist boat, ultimately you're asking, and women today are still asking, please, stronger collection of men, allow us to do X, Y, Z, right?
I think it's asking society not to hurt them. But
that's an inequality.
I'm not arguing that women are as strong as men. I'm not trying to argue that as a collection that they're equal in every aspect.
Yeah, but you said equal opportunities.
Of course.
Do women have the equal opportunity to defend or take other people's rights?
If you're talking like everything all else equal? Or are we talking like they can have certain abilities to do that in terms of the weaponry that they have, in terms of the organization of society that they have? Like I think that you're assuming that we live in a state of nature, which we don't currently live in a state of nature.
No, I still think that nature bleeds in. I know what you're saying, that we live in a state of luxury. Are you saying like decadence?
A little bit.
It's not like brutality of the wilderness, right?
Sure.
Because of men.
Because that's...
Men built structures, built concrete jungles, you know? They built underground systems.
But a fair amount of that was based...
The only reason we're not in the jungle is because of men.
You do realize that a collection of men together without like knowing like how a building is made, you can't just pull like a bunch of men together and say, build this building. They're not going to know how to do that.
I understand you need engineers, but that's irrelevant because if you say without the engineer, you can't build a building. Yeah. Well, there are people who've built buildings without insane levels of engineering.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying to build the society that we have right now,
maintain it, you need brute force. And you can't fix anything. What does it have? Well, we're back to the leverage. If men can leverage their brute force, so I gave the example of voting, that when collective of men vote, they're basically saying, you know what, I'm going to vote. Even though the alternative, I don't want to do the alternative, but the alternative could be that I get all my friends with our guns and overthrow, if we can. We'll start a war or whatever.
Why can't women get together with all their friends who are men and do that? You're saying men can appeal to other men to enforce their own rights. Why can't women do the same thing with their friends?
Men can collectively do that without women. Women can't do it without men.
I don't think that's necessarily true.
It is absolutely true. No, there's no collective of women who could, if that was true, some of what you would think are the worst places in the world in regards to a woman's experience, in the standard, they can't take over the men, dude.
I think that they could, as you're talking about, leverage the power that they do have against that system. I'm not denying that there's biological differences between men and women. I don't see kind of what argument you're getting at. I think that women are largely, in a sense, many women are complicit in the patriarchal structure that we have and help to uplift it.
Good.
There is a war. Yeah, but I'm saying that it is not all just brute force. There's an ideological component here. There's women who believe in this system and will back men up on it.
I understand that. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm saying if you had all of that stuff exist,
they just wouldn't do it.
No, none of it matters if you don't have force enforcing it.
If every woman in society, collectively, all of them, which is an impossible hypothetical because all women are not going to agree on something and all men are not going to agree on something. If all women, decided immediately to disagree with all men, do you think all men would stand strong in that disagreement and be like, no, you're my slave now? Or would some of them be like, wow, my wife is coming to me and saying she doesn't like
disagree
X,
about
Y,
what,
Z.
though? Like
the way society's structured.
Yeah, I would say, you know what the men would say?
What?
That I would get all the men to collectively get together.
You can't.
Look, like if all the women collectively got together and screeched into the ether and went, we don't like it anymore. That's basically every women's march, by the way. What men like to do from the sidelines in the houses that they built is say, what are you going to do about it?
Hold on, but then that's just being like, fuck you, I don't give a shit about you.
Well, in a funny way, no, it's not saying we don't give a shit because the people we're talking about are misguiding And they're misguided with what their leverage is. So women's leverage is not marching in the street holding signs until things change, even though, let's say the 18th Amendment, before the 19th Amendment, before they could vote, they did have a moral leverage. So I actually agree with you that women do have some sort of, I don't want to call it manipulation in a pejorative sense, but they have the ability, back then, by the way, they had the ability to point out, let's say, moral issues, right?
Sure.
Point out degeneracy, point out things that were indecent. Women have a sense about it. You call them Karens now, right? Back in the day, before they were given the right to vote, the 18th Amendment, they actually used their moral leverage within society because men still revered women and their opinions about certain things because they had a specific place in their home and in society.
Men still do that. You're never going to get all men to ignore the interests of all women.
I understand. I'm not saying that. I'm saying
even majority.
No, I'm saying that without men actualizing whatever the request is, it's just a grievance.
I'm not denying that if a society does not follow through on what the grievances are, then sure.
No, Oliver, you keep swapping. I understand why you're doing this. It's fine. But I'm going to correct you every time. You can't swap out what we really mean is a collection of men specifically. And you keep saying society to ambiguate it. I'm going to keep disambiguating it because it drives the point home. If there's a collection of people who think society should be XYZ and they want to actualize it, that is force. They're going to develop laws. They're going to develop all sorts of systems.
Okay.
You're going to require brute force. What I'm saying is that's descriptively inequality. Why? Because in your opening, as you move away from feminism, God willing, at least take out equal opportunities because that's not even true for men.
No, I'm not. But I'm not saying that everyone, because everyone should be given the opportunity to
given
do
by
that.
Who?
Dude, fine.
Don't say society
Who cares?
again.
But why? I don't see how
Don't say
that's
society.
But it's not. I don't see how that's relevant.
Okay,
though.
it is relevant. Look, I look at the world through a descriptive lens that it's patriarchal and it's hierarchical. I'm not saying it's a ought that is good always. Might sometimes is good. But let's look at it as a house, right? Let's say you're the father. Again, God willing, I'm throwing this out there. Oliver the father. You have 5 kids, beautiful wife, big old house from being a lawyer. Okay. The kids are the women in this instance.
I don't.
Just it's just an analogy, okay?
Yeah, okay.
The kids are screaming, I want the house this way. They're screaming loud. They made signs. They march every morning in front of the breakfast nook, okay?
Okay.
Right? You're like, sit down, have breakfast. If they equal the protesters, right, in this instance, isn't it ultimately, who is it ultimately going to be up to in the house, whether they change the house or not?
If they change the house?
If they're screaming to change the house, right? Who's ultimately gonna decide whether it's gonna happen or not?
Sure, the person who has the power. I'm not disagreeing.
So you agree in the analogy? It's a good analogy because the women in society don't have the equal opportunity or power to change society. They need to get the ears of men. They need to somehow use other forms of leverage, but it's never going to be identical to power. What I'm saying to you, I think we agree. Men's leverage is brute force. Do they use it correctly or not? That's a whole other debate, right? Is it just or not? Women have the leverage of being the potential mothers and wives and the child bearers and the people raising the children. My view is that the best place a collection of women, I'm not saying all of them, and I'm not saying force. I'm saying the best thing to advocate for women, the truest form of real feminism would be to appeal to the feminine nature and what they're really good at, which is not fighting and making people bleed. It's raising children.
Why is
that not feminism?
Why are you dichotomizing those, though? Because you're saying that society is fundamentally dichotomized into fighting and killing each other and raising children. I don't think that those are the only two things
I didn't say that.
can do. But then why can't women and men? I think women and men should pursue other things that aren't just fighting and killing people and raising children, because there is so much in between there that both men and women can do.
I'm not saying they can't do these things. I'm saying I'm trying to prioritize. That's why I'm gonna try to. You have to be a little charitable with the dichotomy because I'm looking at urgency and priority. Okay, I'm not saying that there isn't a list of things underneath that they might want to do and not do or whatever. I'm saying ultimately, for a society to exist, you need three things. Law and order, which we already established requires men primarily for the most part. Obligations and duties, still a little bit blurry on your side of what provides obligations and duties. But then people, human beings, do you know that I know that you mentioned it.
We do have a fertility crisis. We have a birth rate crisis.
Okay, I'm not going to blame everything on feminists, but would you concede that you've at least witnessed pretty high octane propaganda from a feminist view against mothering and being a mother in the home?
As a requirement, yes.
Not as a requirement.
Yes, as a requirement.
No,
as an obligation that women have, and if they don't do it, they are failing as women. Yes, I have seen very little of feminists saying you can't have kids. A majority of feminists and people do have children.
I'm not saying can't. I'm saying what's being presented as strong femme. Do you see mostly mothers, or do you see girl bosses? Just answer that.
I think the reason we see it as girl bosses is because for so long, being a woman has been defined as being a mother. So what this is it's a reaction to the prescriptions that have been put on women for so long. What does it mean to be a good woman? You raise a child, you raise children, you're in the home.
Still correct. It's still correct, though.
I don't know, not necessarily. Women don't have to do that. Men don't have to do that.
If you want a society, you have to do that.
You do. There has
So
to
do you
be
want a feminist society or not?
I do want a feminist society.
Then you need those things.
No, you do, but you don't need to obligate people to do them. People will do it on their own. You don't have to tell
They're
women.
not doing it.
Why aren't they doing it? It's because they can't fucking afford to do it.
No, that's not true.
It is
No,
absolutely.
why are the poorest people have the most?
What?
Why are the poorest people have the most kids?
Why do poor people have the most kids?
Generally.
Largely because they don't have access to contraception.
Hold on a
to a lot of those things. Because they don't have access to education.
Hold on a second. We don't have a moderator. You just said because people can't afford it. I just pointed a counterpoint. I just gave you a counterpoint that the poorest people are having the most kids.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's not a good reason.
Hold on. Just because poor people are having children.
More poor people have more children than the wealthy, released from the fully liberated fembot, right? The feminoids are in Western luxurious countries. I would argue that it's not because they don't have money. It's because they have a materialist worldview.
Well, no, I think they have a worldview that says you have the option to have children or not.
No,
and I think people who are poor, I think largely, I think, well,
you're in college, dude.
Yeah, I am in college.
Wait a second. Are you saying that you don't hear from every angle, not just in media, not just in movies, not just in education? You're not hearing the messaging that says, women, we got to fight against this whole you being at home, being a mother thing. You need to be a strong, independent woman, right? Go out there and be a girl boss, right?
And I don't know what women you're talking to. I don't think, we can ask women this question. When you hear that, do you hear, I should not have children, or I should not center every aspect of my existence around being a mother and instead prioritize some of my own well-being over that? And I don't think that is antithetical to having a society that has children. People will have children if they have the resources to do so.
Forget the ought for a second, okay? I'm going to grant you that the ought claim isn't being made. But are you saying the power of media in today's age, you and me are not going to agree that doesn't influence the way women see childhood, see birth. Look, every single image of childbirth in media for the last 20 years has been like an emergency screaming fest where everyone's it looks like they're about to die, dude.
And what happens after that?
What do you mean? What happens?
In the scene, what happens after the screaming and all that?
Well, they give them the baby, and if it's not poorly written, well, they get a shot of endorphins.
There you go. Yeah. So it's not anti having children.
Well,
it shows that, and then
that's
women
fine.
They love their children, and it's a beautiful baby.
Fair enough, but when you're looking at the overall propaganda from feminism, right? Okay. I don't think you're the representation, by the way. Would you agree?
I don't really think there is a representation.
You don't think there's a central through line of of narrative from the general feminists, like even every phase of feminism. There's a through line.
I think there is a type of feminism. I think there is a picture of feminism that gets amplified by the media.
Okay, what is that?
And people who are sympathetic to your view because of the way that algorithms are structured and the way that media is structured.
What's that?
You get presented.
Tell me that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, women hate having children. They view being mothers as inherently oppressive,
right.
And they yell that. I'm not saying that's not a narrative. I'm just saying I don't think it's actually something that most people and even women subscribe to. I think most women ideally want to be mothers. They just don't want to be defined as child bearers. They don't want to be, because they want to be able to have because just like men aren't defined as fathering children.